The year was 1888, and Whitechapel was a crowded, dimly lit, and overpopulated district in London's East End, where poverty and squalor ran rampant. As the gas lights flickered through the fog, men and women hurried along the cobblestone streets, eager to reach the safety of home. That autumn, something sinister stalked the streets, a killer with a predatory hunger, who would become one of the most notorious figures in criminal history, Jack the Ripper. It began one late August night. Mary Ann Nichols, known as Polly, had spent her last shilling on a bed in a boarding house. Denied a room, she wandered the streets, desperate, her shawl pulled tight against the night air. Hours later, she was found dead in Buck's Row, her throat slashed and her body mutilated. The discovery was a horror unlike anything the residents or police had seen, and it sent shockwaves through the community. Her murder wasn't just a brutal killing, it was the work of someone cold and calculating, someone who left a message written in blood. The police launched an investigation, but in a district of so many shadows and secrets, clues were hard to come by. They had no suspects, no motive, and only one terrifying certainty: whoever had killed Mary Ann Nichols was likely to strike again. Fear took hold of Whitechapel as people whispered of a monster who roamed among them. Then, less than a month later, on September 8, 1888, that monster did strike again. This time, the victim was Annie Chapman. Her body was found in the backyard of a lodging house on Hanbury Street, with the same horrific mutilations. The brutality of these crimes stunned even seasoned officers. The press caught wind of the story and sensationalized it with headlines about a bloodthirsty fiend. The public devoured every morbid detail, and rumors spread faster than the police could contain them. As fear gripped the East End, theories blossomed. Some believed that only a doctor or someone with medical knowledge could carry out such grisly work, cutting with precision that suggested anatomical expertise. Others speculated about a butcher or slaughterhouse worker, for he seemed to leave no time to waste. Police officers, pressured by the rising panic, sought out suspects and conducted endless interviews, but they couldn't catch the shadow that seemed to slip away as easily as it appeared. Then came the night of September 30th, a night that would become known as the double event. Two bodies were discovered within hours of each other: Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. Stride's murder was peculiar. Found in Dutfield's yard, she had a deep cut to her throat, but no other signs of mutilation. It was as if something or someone had interrupted him. It wasn't long before his bloody work was finished. Catherine Eddowes was found later that night, her face and body defiled in the most brutal way yet. The Ripper seemed to be honing his technique, growing bolder and more vicious. Panic turned to hysteria. The newspapers coined a name for the killer, Jack the Ripper, and his story became the city's obsession. Each morning, Londoners held their breath, wondering if another murder would be discovered. Letters began pouring into police stations and newspaper offices, supposedly from the Ripper himself. Most were hoaxes, but one, known as the Dear Boss letter, was taken seriously. In it, the writer taunted the police and signed off as Jack the Ripper, giving the killer a persona as haunting as the murders themselves. By now, the Ripper wasn't just a man, he was a ghostly presence that seemed to lurk behind every corner. Parents warned their children to come home before dark, and women clutched their shawls close, dreading the shadow of the unknown. The police were overwhelmed. Officers patrolled the streets in pairs, and the Metropolitan Police and Scotland Yard were drawn into a massive, frantic investigation. Detectives like Inspector Frederick Aberline were assigned to the case, scouring every street, every shadow, every story. Hundreds of witnesses were interviewed, and potential suspects were brought in and questioned. But the Ripper was always one step ahead. Some believed he was a surgeon, others thought he was an immigrant from Eastern Europe. Each theory seemed plausible, yet no one knew for sure. And then, as abruptly as the murders began, they stopped. The last known victim of Jack the Ripper was Mary Jane Kelly, found on November 9, 1888, in her small room at Miller's Court. Her body was mutilated beyond recognition, a macabre culmination of the Ripper's reign of terror. Mary's murder marked the most horrifying act of violence in a series of incomprehensible atrocities. But it was also the end. After Mary Jane Kelly, no more bodies were found. No more taunting letters appeared. The shadow had vanished as quickly as it had come. London held its breath, waiting for news of another victim, but none came. People went on with their lives, slowly emerging from the grip of terror. Yet the questions remained. Who was Jack the Ripper, and why had he suddenly stopped? Theories persisted, ranging from madness to illness to death. Some believed he had been caught for another crime, while others speculated that he had simply disappeared, slipping back into society to live a normal life. As the years passed, Jack the Ripper became a legend. His story was retold in books, plays, and films, evolving from a tale of horror to a dark mystery that still captivates imaginations today. Even now, historians and detectives pore over the case, studying old records, re-examining evidence, and proposing new theories, hoping to uncover the identity of the man behind the murders. But Jack the Ripper remains as elusive as he was on those foggy nights in Whitechapel, his true identity shrouded in myth and mystery. He is the face of fear that haunts the shadows, a reminder of the darkness that sometimes lurks just beyond the edge of the lamplight, waiting to strike when least expected. And perhaps that is why, even now, the story of Jack the Ripper endures, because he was not just a man, but a force of terror, a ghostly figure whose story refuses to rest in peace, lingering like the fog over London's East End, an unsolved riddle that will forever haunt the city's history.